Exodus 21. Now these are the ordinances or the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th year he shall go out and pay nothing. In other words, he's free. Amazing, eh? 6 years and the 7th year, same like the week, works 6 days, 7th year is a Sabbath. So he's free after the 7th year, he can go out. If he comes in by himself, in other words alone, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. In other words, he's already married, he comes in, him and his wife, after 6 years, in the 7th year, they're both free. If the master has given him a wife, in other words, he comes in single and he gets a wife from the master, and she bore him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be the master's, and he shall go out by himself. In other words, after 6 years, in the 7th year, he's allowed to leave, but he can't take the wife his master gave him, nor can he take the children that he had with his wife. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. In other words, he now chooses to continue to be a servant or a slave. Then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, then she shall not go out as the male slaves do. In other words, a female servant slave doesn't have that 6 years and the 7th year free. She's bound to that master. But if she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, in other words, the master got in a slave, a female slave, and gives her to the son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. In other words, if he gets a second wife, he cannot disregard the first wife in any way, or the servant in any way. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. So in other words, here, if the son doesn't want a wife because he got a second wife and he doesn't want to provide for her food, clothing, or marital rights, then she must be set free. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, in other words, it wasn't pre-planned, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee, so a city of refuge or a safe city. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar. In other words, he can't cling to the altar or in this security village or sanctuary city, that he may die. So in other words, you take him out of there and then he can be killed. And who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. And he who curses father or his mother shall surely be put to death. If men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again, in other words, after a while, and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. In other words, compensation and restoration. Verse 20. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. In other words, there's a limit to the amount of punishment or anger you can mete out on a servant. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. That's interesting. So if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies, he shall surely be punished. But if he is not dead, but he is alive for a day or two, then he shall not be punished, because he is property. Strange. Verse 22, if men fight or struggle and hurt a woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. I found that to be the most, let's call it, less severe injury that you can get to be set free as a slave. Just lose a tooth. Verse 28. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. But if the ox tended or was inclined to thrust with its horns in times past, and it has been made known to its owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life whatever is imposed on him. So in other words, he can buy himself out of that death sentence or death penalty. Whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to this judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give to the master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So it's interesting, the life for a male or female servant is 30 pieces of shekel, or 30 shekels of silver. And that's the same price Jesus was sold or betrayed by Judas for. And if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to the owner, but the dead animal shall be his. If one man's ox hurts another so that he dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it, and the dead ox they shall also divide. However, verse 36, or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in times past, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own.